The ChrisWatts case, the perfect husband with a dark secret. Case 0360. Hello everyone. Welcome back to Case 0360. I'm Sasha. Tonight we're examining one of the most disturbing family murder cases in modern American history. A case that shocked millions of people across the United States and around the world. A case that began with what appeared to be a missing persons investigation, but quickly transformed into a nightmare that few could have imagined. For neighbors, friends, and co-workers, ChrisWatts seemed like an ordinary family man, a devoted husband, a loving father, a quiet and hard-working employee, the kind of person nobody would suspect of hiding a terrible secret. But behind the carefully maintained image of a perfect family, investigators would uncover a truth so disturbing that it continues to fascinate and horrify people years later. This is the story of ChrisWatts, the man many believed was the perfect husband, until his dark secret was exposed. Before we begin, please be aware that this case involves family violence and the deaths of children. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's begin. In the summer of 2018, the Watts family appeared to be living the American dream. They lived in Frederick, Colorado. Chris Watts worked for an oil company. His wife, Shanann Watts, was active on social media and often shared glimpses of family life online. Together, they were raising two young daughters, Bella and Celeste. To outsiders, they appeared happy. Photographs showed smiling faces, family vacations, birthday celebrations, holiday gatherings. The image presented to the world was one of love and stability, but appearances can be deceiving, and investigators would later discover that serious problems were developing behind closed doors. According to friends and family members, the marriage had become strained. Financial pressures existed, communication issues were growing, and the relationship was facing increasing difficulties. At the same time, Chris Watts had reportedly begun a relationship with another woman, a development that would later become central to the investigation. Yet despite these problems, nobody expected what was about to happen. On the morning of August 13, 2018, Shanann Watts returned home from a business trip. Security footage captured her arriving at the family residence during the early morning hours. It would be the last time she was seen alive. Later that day, concern began growing. Friends noticed something unusual. Shanann wasn't responding to messages. She missed appointments, and nobody could reach her. One friend became particularly worried and decided to check on her personally. When there was still no response, authorities were contacted. At first, the case appeared to be a missing persons investigation. Police arrived at the home. Questions were asked. Search efforts began. Chris Watts spoke with investigators. He also appeared in television interviews. Standing outside his home, he pleaded for his family's return. He asked for information. He appeared concerned, and to many viewers, he looked like a worried husband desperate to find his missing wife and children. But something felt off. Even during those early interviews, some observers noticed behavior they considered unusual. His body language, his facial expressions, his emotional responses. None of these observations proved guilt, but they would later receive enormous attention once the truth emerged. As investigators examined the case more closely, inconsistencies began appearing. The timeline wasn't adding up. Certain statements raised questions, and evidence slowly started pointing in a troubling direction. One of the biggest breakthroughs came from surveillance footage. Investigators reviewed security video from a neighbor's camera system. The footage showed activity around the Watts home during the early morning hours. As detectives analyzed the video, they paid close attention to Chris Watts' reactions. The footage itself did not provide all the answers, but it increased suspicion, and investigators intensified their focus on Chris, At the same time, detectives began examining digital evidence, phone records, text messages, internet activity, financial information, and communication patterns. The picture becoming visible was very different from the public image many people had seen. Investigators learned about marital difficulties. They learned about the extramarital relationship, and they learned about conversations involving separation and divorce. The case was changing rapidly. Then came a crucial interview. During questioning, investigators confronted ChrisWatts with growing evidence. Initially, he denied involvement, but eventually his story changed. He admitted responsibility for the deaths. The confession stunned the nation. The husband who had publicly begged for his family's safe return was now admitting involvement in their disappearance. But the investigation was far from over. Authorities still needed to determine exactly what happened, and the details that emerged would shock even experienced investigators. According to the findings presented by prosecutors, Chris Watts murdered his pregnant wife, Shanann. He then murdered his two daughters, Bella and Celeste. The crimes occurred inside the family home. The motive, investigators believed, involved his desire to leave his marriage and pursue a different life, a life without the responsibilities he viewed as obstacles. When the public learned the details, outrage followed immediately. People struggled to understand how a father could commit such acts against his own family. Friends described feeling betrayed. Co-workers expressed disbelief. And millions of people following the case asked the same question. Why? Why would someone destroy the very family he had spent years presenting to the world? Unfortunately, criminal investigations do not always provide satisfying answers. Human behavior can be extraordinarily complex, and sometimes motives that seem significant to an offender appear completely irrational to everyone else. One particularly disturbing aspect of the case involved disposal of the victims. Investigators discovered evidence at a remote oil site connected to Chris Watts' employer. The location became central to the investigation. It was there that authorities recovered critical evidence. The discoveries confirmed the horrifying reality of what had happened. As news coverage expanded, public interest exploded. Television networks covered the case continuously. True crime communities analyzed every development. Online discussions multiplied. People examined interviews. Body language experts offered opinions. Psychologists discussed possible motivations. The case quickly became one of the most heavily discussed criminal investigations in recent American history. Part of the fascination came from the contrast. Chris Watts did not fit the stereotype many people imagine when thinking about violent offenders. He had no image of being dangerous, no reputation for criminal behavior, no obvious signs that would lead most people to suspect such a horrific crime. That disconnect disturbed many observers. It challenged assumptions about what evil looks like, and it raised uncomfortable questions about how well we truly know the people around us. As prosecutors prepared their case, evidence continued accumulating. Digital records, witness statements, physical evidence, and Chris Watts' own admissions painted a devastating picture. Eventually, rather than proceeding through a lengthy public trial, Chris Watts agreed to plead guilty. In November 2018, he pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including the murders of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. The plea agreement ensured he would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. For many family members, the plea provided some measure of closure. It prevented years of additional court proceedings. It avoided appeals that might prolong the pain, and it ensured accountability. Yet closure is never complete in cases like this. The loss remains, the grief remains, and the questions remain. One reason the Chris Watts case continues attracting attention is the enormous amount of documentation available. Social media posts, home videos, text messages, photographs, interviews. Together, they created a detailed portrait of family life before the tragedy. As a result, many people felt unusually connected to the victims. They watched Bella and Celeste grow through videos shared online. They saw family celebrations. They witnessed ordinary moments. And that made the outcome even more heartbreaking. The case also sparked broader conversations about relationships, family pressures, financial stress, and deception. Experts debated warning signs. Could anyone have predicted the outcome? Were there clues? Could intervention have prevented the tragedy? These questions remain subjects of discussion today. Many professionals caution against oversimplifying such cases. People often search for a single warning sign, a single explanation, a single cause. But reality is usually more complicated. Major crimes often result from multiple factors interacting over time. Understanding those factors is important, but understanding does not mean excusing. Nothing can justify what occurred. Another reason the case remains significant is its impact on public awareness. People became more attentive to relationship dynamics. They became more aware of how appearances can sometimes conceal deeper problems, and they became more interested in understanding the psychology behind family annihilation cases. Family annihilation is a term used to describe situations in which an individual destroys their own family. While relatively rare, such cases often generate intense public attention because they violate society's most fundamental expectations. Parents are expected to protect children. Spouses are expected to care for one another. When those expectations are shattered, the emotional impact can be enormous. The ChrisWatts case became one of the most well-known examples in modern history. Years later, documentaries, books, podcasts, and investigative programs continue examining the case. New audiences continue discovering the story, and discussions continue regarding motive, psychology, and prevention. Yet amid all the analysis, it's important not to lose sight of the victims. Shanann Watts, Bella Watts, Celeste Watts, and Shanann's unborn son. These were real people, real lives, real futures that were stolen. True crime stories often focus heavily on offenders, but the victims deserve remembrance as well. Their lives mattered, their stories mattered, and they remain at the center of this tragedy. As we conclude tonight's case, one lesson stands out above all others. Appearances can be misleading. The image presented to the public does not always reflect reality behind closed doors. The Watts family appeared to have everything. Yet beneath that image, devastating problems were developing. Problems that eventually led to one of the most shocking crimes America has ever witnessed. For investigators, family members, and the public, the case remains unforgettable, not only because of its brutality, but because of the betrayal involved. A betrayal of trust, a betrayal of family, and a betrayal of everything the victims believed they had. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Case 0360. I'm Sasha. If you found this case informative, please subscribe and turn on notifications for more true crime investigations, criminal case breakdowns, and real-life mysteries. And as always, stay aware, because sometimes the most disturbing secrets are hidden behind the most ordinary faces. I'll see you in the next case.